David, thank you so much for being on with us today. Obviously,
Sure.
I love having you on whenever we need to dial in and talk about the legislative agenda, what the Democrats could do, like gamesmanship in the way that, Republicans do on a regular basis. I feel like your outlet especially is one of the best at that. Whenever there is some legislative gamesmanship that could happen, I feel like you give out really good pointers on what the Democrats should be doing, but then they, of course, end up not following through and instead go to like the Center for American Progress or something, which is at this point basically regurgitating whatever, third-way neoliberal messaging groups are telling the Democrats to do, which is always to stand back and concede and show their bellies. I'm calling this segment Legislative Warfare. Thank you so much for coming on, David. Let's start very quickly. There is obviously a government shutdown that is imminent, potentially, probably not going to happen. Democrats are threatening to shut down the government over DHS funding. Can you give us a little bit of details about this first block that came through in the Senate, this massive funding bill with critical talks underway to avoid a government shutdown?
Going into this fight, we had a big shutdown in October, right? October 1st. It was 43 days long, longest government shutdown in American history. That ended in November, and they did basically a stopgap funding until January 30th. So tomorrow, that's when that funding runs out. And in the lead up to this, Democrats were pretty adamant that they were not going to let the government shut down. We're not doing the same thing we did last time. We're not going to let the government shut down. Even after the murder of Renee Good, the House passed basically all the outstanding government funding bills that needed to be passed. Hakeem Jeffries opposed the Department of Homeland Security appropriations bill, but didn't whip the vote. He didn't require unity from his caucus. And that bill passed with 7 Democrats supporting it. And that was the margin of victory. If 7 Democrats didn't support that, that bill would not have passed.
with all the absentees, right? And everything involved.
Right. Given all the absentees. But, even one absentee wouldn't have helped Republicans, and 2 others specifically voted against that bill and were public about it, said, we're sitting this out. And another one was never there that entire day. He wasn't even in the city. So there would have needed to be serious arm twisting in order for that bill to pass. Yeah. But instead of requiring unity, Jeffries allowed that vote to go forward without whipping it. Everyone expected coming into, Saturday, a week ago.
Really quickly, sorry to cut you off, but would you say that there was whipping involved? Do you think that this was actually a moment of not incompetence necessarily, but actually competence? Because I'm beginning to I have this attitude where
I know what you're getting at.
Yeah, because you got Marie Concentration Camp Perez, who was one of the spoilers, the Problem Solvers Caucus, right? These people who are a part of what we now know as the rotating villain, right? The rotating villain structure in the Democratic Party. And I do feel like it's not a matter of incompetence necessarily, but it's actually Hakeem Jeffries whipping the votes in favor of the Republican agenda. Do you think that that's an inadequate assessment?
I mean, whether he's doing it consciously or unconsciously, if he says, I'm not whipping the vote in the traditional sense that we know it, which is I'm not requiring unity on this vote, he's saying we kind of don't care if it passes. We're fine with it passing.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be conspiratorial to say that if you're not whipping the vote, you're not requiring a certain unity on the vote, you're okay with it passing. And indeed, that's exactly what happened. So what happened was the House basically passed 6 different funding bills. It's a long, wonky story, but basically every year the government is funded through 12 funding bills. 6 have already passed. There's 6 outstanding. Those 6 got passed in the House last week, and they bundled them together into one vote, one bill, so that the Senate can easily pass through one vote the other 6 bills and let it go. And up until basically Saturday, a week ago, that was what was going to happen. That was seemingly the deal that was made. And then Alex Preddy was murdered. And Democrats realized it was sort of untenable, just impossible to agree to fund this agency that is shooting down people in the streets. And Democrats, one by one, including Democrats that basically voted in the Senate to end the government shutdown last time, were saying, I can't vote to fund ICE. I can't vote to fund DHS. And so Democrats came up with a new strategy. And the strategy was, look, there are 6 bills we'll vote for 5 of them, but for this DHS bill, you got to give us something else. We need other legislative standards in order to move forward with the DHS funding. And Republicans were in a weak position. This is obviously hugely unpopular that they're murdering people in the streets. Their own party was saying maybe Kristi Noem should go, or we have to do an investigation, or we have to, do something to placate the voice of the public on this. And they actually agreed to split out DHS funding from the other 5 bills and say, we'll negotiate something on DHS and we'll pass the other 5 bills. And, we'll kind of give you what you want, Democrats, because they wanted to negotiate. Well, about 20 minutes after that happened, yesterday, Chuck Schumer comes out and says, here are our negotiating terms. And they are much smaller. They had basically shrunken from what Democrats were talking about throughout the week. Democrats had a long list of demands, and Schumer basically condensed them into 3 smaller demands. Now, they would do something, but it's probably much less than advertised. And so now we're in a position, right now they're arguing over, how long they're going to do some stopgap funding for DHS. And the question is, how long is that going to last? 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. But that'll happen. They'll pass the other 5 bills. There'll be a small government shutdown basically until Monday, until the House can take care of, whatever the Senate does. Then there'll be this debate over what are we going to do about DHS? And Schumer basically pre-compromised his own position.
That's shocking.
I'm
shocked.
Right.
Wait, concede ahead of time? Yeah. That's part of the deal, right? When you have leverage or an upper hand in any sort of bargaining negotiation, you come to the table pre-cocked, preloaded with concessions, and then you don't even get those preloaded concessions at the end of the day. And you
get
just
a
fucking
smaller
roll over.
version of that.
Yeah.
Right. And what I think a lot of us have been saying for years and years and years is what you really have to do is maximize your asks. Know that you're probably going to get less than what you asked for.
Yeah.
So what you end up getting is much bigger than if you sort of try to tailor your ask to here's exactly what I think Republicans are going to agree to, and then we'll get a little bit less than that. It's just,
and be unafraid to also lean into public sentiment, because there is broad public sentiment on this at a time when poll after poll is showing that the plurality of American voters actually want ICE abolition. The fact that there have been so many third-way neoliberal pollsters and messaging groups that are circulating to Politico and many other outlets and circulating memos to all the establishment Democrats saying that people want a reasonable approach to ICE. They just want reasonable, moderate resolutions here over and over again. The reason why they're doing that is so that they are trying to tell us, the masses that are angry, that are protesting in the streets, you're not going to get what you want. And here is why. Here is why you should be ready for defeat here.
Totally.
But you
Let's
already
talk
mentioned
about one of those memos, by the way, really quick, because we did a story on this at prospect.org. One of those memos came out from the Searchlight Institute, which is
John
one
Fetterman.
of these centrist organizations. Fetterman's former chief of staff is running that. Yeah, and I'm Adam Gentleson. But he had this guy, I believe his name is Blas Nunez Neto, write this very influential memo to Capitol Hill saying, we don't want to abolish ICE, we just want to reform ICE. Well, what we found out is that guy works for a corporate lobbying firm, like a shadow lobbying firm for companies that have immigration contracts. So of course he doesn't want to abolish ICE because his paymasters literally, give him money so that he can maximize their contractual arrangements. So that's what that's all about.
Reminds me of another Democrat appointment. You might have heard of him. His name is Tom Homan, who after his stint in the Obama administration and the Trump administration, he turned around and made a lot of money, apparently, farming out private prison contracts to these immigration detention facilities. And if I recall correctly, very good guy. He's a very good deal maker. I think Tim Walz and Jacob Fry both said that, he's better than Bovino, I guess.
Honestly,
he got a fat $50K bag from the FBI, too. He's such a wheeler and dealer. He's such a good deal maker. And, these guys are directly making money off of this. They're making money off of tying government contracts to these for-profit prison systems that work for the immigration detention facilities.
This organization I was talking about, it's called West Exec, this shadow lobbying firm, was founded by Tony Blinken. So I'm sure you would appreciate
yes, of course.
That aspect of it. But anyway, yeah. So let's talk about what Schumer actually asked for here and why it's different than what we could do to rein in ICE and CBP. Customs and Border Patrol. He had 3 asks, Schumer did. One was, I want to end roving patrols and tighten up administrative warrants, tighten up these warrants that are only signed by Border Patrol when they want to go into somebody's house. So he wants to limit enforcement actions to sort of known targets and use local law enforcement in conjunction.
Which is what they were asking for. There's JD Vance. JD Vance, Trump administration. Like, Democrats have this unimaginable, this incredible tendency to take something that their opposition wants and then turn it around and make it seem as though this is a point
we'll give them that.
This is like they're making it seem like they have this is an oppositional thing that they're forcing ICE to do, including down to even the usage of body cameras, which is not an unpopular position at all amongst law enforcement at this point, even though it's presented as an oppositional thing. These guys are already using their cameras, right? Like Renee Good's assassin.
Renee, he was like using his phone. He was filming the whole goddamn thing.
Yeah.
So that's the second ask, which is they call it masks off, body cameras on, saying that no masks, you have to show ID, and you have to use body cameras at all times. They're already in the earlier bill that Hakeem Jeffries allowed through. They gave $20 million to buy more body cameras for ICE. And then the third thing that Schumer's asking for are standards on use of force that match those of law enforcement at the state and local level. So those are the 3 asks. As you just sort of intimated, Tom Homan is kind of already putting together some of these things in Minneapolis. He had a press conference today where he said that we're only going to target people. Actually, what he said was, and this is key, he said, we'll target only people with criminal charges. So like if you were charged with something and then let go, you're now on the list, which is a little bizarre. But he said it's going to be targeted. It's going to, not be roving patrols. It's going to be less disruptive to the public. There was a memo that came out from ICE yesterday that said, don't talk to agitators, is what they call them. Don't talk to protesters.
Yeah.
A lot of the things that Schumer is asking for seemingly are the standards that ICE is moving towards to push this back into the shadows, get it off of TV, and not have these kinds of incidents. So the standards have kind of always been there. The problem is that when they're violated, there's no enforcement of it whatsoever.
Yeah.
We still don't even know the name of Alex Preddy's killers. We don't know their names.
Yeah.
They've been on apparently paid leave ever since the incident. Another term for paid leave is vacation. That's what we're dealing with right now. And there's nothing in these asks from Schumer that would give any sense of accountability, force ICE or CBP to cooperate with investigations with the state of Minnesota, with the Hennepin County District Attorney. None of that is in here. And they still are, by the way, obstructing those investigations. They are not sharing evidence in those particular cases. And that's just the tip of the iceberg as far as, what's not in here.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I briefly touched on was the body camera situation, which is like participating in the mass surveillance initiatives that ICE is already engaging in when they like literally personally are filming the protesters. Ken Klippenstein found out that there is like massive databases now of like what they consider to be domestic terrorists, at least 10,000 American citizens that are now in a database that is considered to be like, domestic terrorist list. And these are all people, ICE agents, unmasked and masked ICE agents will go up to people and film them and take photos of them and say, hey, you're on a database now, smile, right? They're very open about why they're doing this. So body cameras are obviously not going to change the game at all. And on top of that, the previous rules that even Jonathan Ross violated with the Renee Good shooting, which was in the aftermath of, I think, a Department of Homeland Security investigation that was conducted all the way back in 2014, where they found that ICE agents would constantly dive in front of cars in an effort to create like a legal kill for themselves, had to be changed already. So if no one is actually enforcing these pre-existing rules, then going around and being like, well, we have to get a messaging bill out there to enforce the already existing rules is going to be completely inconsequential. So the question I have for you is, what is more consequential than what these Democrats have offered? Because obviously they've already given $170 billion in funding to the Department of Homeland Security in the previous bill. And one thing that you mentioned is Tom Homan going after people who have been charged, which is now legal because of the Lake and Riley Act that Democrats also voted for.
That's right.
There's a difference for those of you who are watching that don't understand. There's a difference between being charged with a crime and being convicted of a crime. Being charged with a crime does not mean that you actually committed the crime. Innocent until proven guilty. We have a concept called due process in this country. This is a violation of that process. And they are technically following the letter of the law because of this new legislation in the Lake and Riley Act when they say we're just going to go after people who have been charged with a crime, right? Suspected of doing a crime.
They're being prioritized.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's talk about first, what elements that aren't in here that aren't related to funding, and then what could be done actually on the funding. There were a number of things that were discussed in the immediate aftermath of the Alex Preddy murder. One of them included returning Customs and Border Patrol to the border rather than doing interior enforcement. Right now, what Homan has said is that CBP will be in a support role, but they're still going to be in Minnesota, hundreds of miles from any border, even though this is border protection. So that was one idea. Another idea was preventing enforcement in so-called sensitive locations like schools or churches. That was the rule. That was basically the standard prior to the Trump administration coming in. Another one was ending these mass quotas for immigration arrests. There are thoughts that there are anywhere from 1,200 to 3,000 a day quotas that these officials, these agents have to round up. And if you get rid of that, you loosen some of the pressure there. And then there's the lack of touching these funding levels. So let's talk about what we're talking about here. When we're talking about the Department of Homeland Security appropriations bill, that's the annual budget for ICE or for CBP. The annual budget for ICE is $10 billion. And that funding is what's being held up right now. However, as you noted, in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act of 2025 that was passed last July, the Department of Homeland Security got an extra $175 billion. And $75 billion of that went to ICE, mainly for enforcement. And what that means is that 7 times the annual budget of ICE was distributed to them in that bill. Nobody is talking about that money as if it can be touched in any way. And I kind of feel like the comparison is when Republicans, how they dealt with the surge in IRS funding that was in the Biden era bill, the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022.
85,000 armed IRS agents.
That's what they called it, right? Yeah. So it was $80 billion surge for ICE. That was over 10 years, by the way, relative for IRS, relative to the $75 billion for ICE. How did the Republicans talk about it? They said exactly what you said. There's going to be 87,000 agents. They actually ran the 2022 midterms on this issue. They said our first day in office, on the first day that we're sworn in, our very first bill, we're going to repeal those 87,000 IRS agents. That's what we're going to do. Kevin McCarthy was out there. That's what he said at every campaign stop. That's what all their individuals said at every campaign stop. And the moment they got leverage, the moment they got a situation where they had votes that Democrats needed to pass stuff, this was when they only controlled the House. Not controlling the Senate, not controlling the presidency. When they controlled the House, they said, you have to claw back that IRS funding. And they did. They clawed back $20 billion. And then the next year, they clawed back another $20 billion. And then the next year, they clawed back more. And even last week in this bill, this one of these appropriation bills, they clawed back another $11 billion in a bipartisan bill that Democrats voted for as well. So now of that $80 billion in IRS funding that was passed in 2022, you know how much is left? $10 billion. That's how much is left. And so Republicans see a thing that they see as a threat to their agenda. People which might have to pay their taxes.
Which make no mistake, the $80 billion was actually so that the IRS could commit to going after some of the major
right.
corporations because they simply don't have the budget to go after major corporations. So they keep their investigations to like small business owners and people who are beneath like the, $10 million line, if we're going to use an arbitrary line here. And this was so that they could actually go after, criminally pursue much larger tax cheats and tax evaders. And
much like the ICE surge, it was a surge of
Yes.
enforcement. It was about enforcement.
Yeah.
It was about enforcing the laws on the books so that people would pay what they legally owe.
Yeah, and which, by the way, for deficit hawks, this would obviously be a tremendous boon, considering that you would be clawing back a lot of this taxable revenue from some of the major cheats. But of course, Republicans did the same thing that they always do. They propagandized. They made it seem like they were going to come after Tom, Dick, and Harry and seize their tractor or seize their trailer or seize their jet ski or something. And they terrify the Republicans into the Republican voters into this clawback.
So yeah, that's what they did. That's what they did. They said, we're going to defund the tax police. We're going to get rid of this money. And they did. They worked on it systematically, and they said, we did. We're going to do it. I have not seen anyone credibly say on the Democratic side, we need to roll back, claw back all of that money that was given to ICE that is responsible for these surges into American cities. ICE does not necessarily have the budget to do what they're doing right now in Minneapolis, to do what they're doing in Maine, to do what they're doing in Arizona, to do what they did in Los Angeles, to do what they did in Chicago and Nashville and New Orleans and all these other places. The ICE personnel has more than doubled since that bill passed. It's gone from a 10,000 strong workforce to 22,000. And that simply would not have been possible without this money. But there is nobody really on the Democratic side, certainly not to the level of how the Republicans talked about IRS funding, saying we need to claw back that money. And I'm not going to pass, whatever must pass bill has to pass until we claw back that money, because that's how the Republicans did it, and they were successful.
So this is where the question arises, is this incompetence or actually competence in the direction of defending this agenda? Are the Democrats simply allowing this agenda to continue in terms of this Gestapo policing force, whether they recognize that this will inevitably harm them? They might get sicked on, in the midterms, they might station them outside of election polling stations, right? In blue districts and blue neighborhoods. Like, this is a very real thing that they're interested in doing. Are the Democrats aware of this and simply do not care? Are they engaging in appeasement towards this fascist administration? Or are they oblivious to it, and that's the reason why they're not saying this?
I don't think it's obliviousness. I don't think it's obliviousness. I think that Democrats are much more than Republicans always concerned about whether or not they, how any issue will be used against them. By the way, taxing the rich and making sure people are paying what they actually legally owe is a super popular issue.
Oh, yeah.
Surging, the IRS might not be popular in and of itself, but making sure people pay what they owe is very, very popular.
Sir, David Shore would like to have a word with you after that. This is not a popularist position. We need to be focusing on $50,000 in small business tax credits.
Well, as we know, as you referred to, abolishing ICE now is a plurality topic among the public.
Yep.
It's a more independents support abolishing ICE than
Plus
reforming
8
it right now.
80% of Democrats and 50% of Republicans voters support abolishing ICE, according to the YouGov poll. 46% overall supported, 43% overall oppose it.
Right. The use of clawing back the surge funding, that's not even abolishing ICE. That's just getting ICE back to the state at which it was at the end of 2024, right? That is not even abolition. And yet they feel completely constrained, like, oh, but Republicans will use this against us. They're constantly on the lookout for what issues Republicans might use against them. And it paralyzes them from listening to their base, from listening to the public and serving the needs that the public says that they want, even when the tide has turned and those votes are actually popular.
Can we talk about the significance of this tide shift as well, especially considering that it didn't happen with Democratic leadership at all? It happened organically, with the exception of the likes of Chris Van Hollen, for example, who I've routinely praised for what he did with Kilmar Abrego Garcia, which we now know was a pivotal turning point in Donald Trump's anti-immigrant agenda actually going underwater. It took a nosedive after the Kilmar Abrego Garcia situation. Yep. And this basically did not happen because the Democrats were pushing for this, in the same way that we see Republicans consistently message over and over again with lies, a barrage of misinformation and manufactured hysteria to arrive at a 66% pro-mass deportation position in the lead up to the election. Democrats didn't even do this. So I don't even know what it would look like if the National Democratic Party was actively engaging in counter messaging, actively speaking about the humanity of migrants and our neighbors and how ruthless and how cruel this administration actually is, and then simultaneously standing firmly on a pro-ICE abolition position. I feel like the numbers would even swing further in the direction of ICE abolition. Yeah. They're so afraid to demonstrate any sort of moral fortitude here, and they've consistently done this, that it leads me to believe that they are actually offering concessions because they kind of like that this is happening, and that they're going to continue funding ICE when they actually win back power.
You make several really good points. First of all, the fact that speaking to the humanity of this situation makes it a popular issue, and what Van Hollen did in particular. I mean, I find astonishing. You mentioned the Center for American Progress before. They put out a giant, here's how we deal with immigration paper. This was July of last year, so after some of the things that happened with Kilmar. ICE is not mentioned in that paper at all, not a single time. That was the big immigration, here's what we do on immigration, Democratic Party document, and it doesn't even mention ICE. So you see the obliviousness here, and you see the lack of desire to talk about these issues in moral terms. So that's number one. Number two, you make the right point that this sentiment, public sentiment, was going down well before Renee Good, well before Alex Preddy. Yeah. It wasn't just triggered by that.
Yes.
That brought the numbers down further, but it wasn't triggered by that. This was already very unpopular, as can be seen by people getting into the streets in huge numbers all over the country whenever this was coming to their communities, whether it was Minnesota, whether it was Los Angeles, whether it was Chicago, anywhere across the country. So, I think that's a real problem for the sort of centrist faction of the party that thinks that Democrats have to run and hide from immigration. It's just a bad issue for them. They should just never talk about it. I think this clearly shows how wrong that was. And it was known to be wrong for months. It wasn't just wrong in the last week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Those are some of my thoughts there. I mean, I think that now we're seeing, and my other point I would make is that, I relate this a little bit to the civil rights movement, and it certainly wasn't political leaders that were leading the way there. I mean, some of these things, these kinds of movements have to happen from the bottom up, because that's where they build broad bases of power. And the politicians are routinely getting out in front of the parade and pretending they're leading it. But often we see the ordinary people on the street protecting their neighbors. That's what's going to drive change. I think that's certainly a big part of this. But now that we've seen the parade mount, it's time for the Democrats to get in front of the parade, right? This is the moment. And right now they're getting in front of the parade, and they have a kazoo rather than the large instrument that they should be using.
Yeah. So if we were to reduce this down to like three major, or not even three, let's do five. Let's do the Zoran technique. If we were to make 5 asks of the Democratic Party in the current back and forth that's happening in Senate, what should the 5 asks be of our national party here?
I think there has to be accountability. There has to be cooperation with all those investigations into these murders. And by the way, we're now tracking at prospect.org how many people have been killed by ICE and Customs and Border Protection. There are now 8 deaths, 9 severe woundings, and 35 people who have died in custody in detention centers. And we're going to keep updating that at the website whenever we can. But there have to be actual investigations of those and real accountability with criminal and civil charges against those people. So the state of things right now where they're obstructing these investigations, that can't happen. That's a really big one for me. Some of the other ideas that have been out there, barring the detention of U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents, which we're seeing repeatedly violated over and over and over again. There need to be some real teeth there. I do think you have to start with the ask of, we don't think that this surge that you're now trying to backtrack on, you're saying you're going to draw down forces in Minnesota, you're only going to do targeted operations. Well, what do you need $75 billion more for in that instance? You could do that with the ICE of 2024. You don't need the supersized ICE of 2025. You're only going to do targeted operations in conjunction with state and local law enforcement. So let's take that money back. So I think that has to be a big part of this as well. I do think the Border Patrol should be on the border, that the Border Patrol shouldn't be doing interior enforcement.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have other ideas, but those are some of my big ones.
I like that. I think we make Tom Homan and Bovino fight one another in a pit. I think that's the third position that I have, which is to have them duke it out. Throw Christian Nome in the pile too. Cage match.
Bovino is going to be gone in a bit, right? He's retiring. He's going to get the new office like Colonel Lockjaw and one battle after another, and that'll be it.
Down to his passwords. Apparently, one of his passwords was Redbone. It's mind-boggling how much one battle after another is.
We reported that. Dan Boguslaw over at our place reported that.
It's mind-boggling.
The similarities between him and Lockjaw. It's amazing.
I mean, they look the same too. It's pretty crazy. As far as like reduction, clawing back ICE funds, obviously, I don't know exactly what legislative machinations exist out there for, like, what kind of congressional power exists out there to force these investigations through. I know that there is like, attorney generals have their hands tied at the end of the day if the federal government refuses to cooperate. I guess what I always think of is like, what would Republicans do in this situation, right? If there was a role reversal, because they're very good at playing politics, right? Their policies are awful, right, but they're very good at playing politics. Like, they do have an ideological commitment, even if it's destructive overall. And I always revert back to that position. Like, Democrats should behave like Republicans do, not on the policy agenda, which is what they're currently doing, unfortunately, but on the politics side. So I suspect one of the things they could do is just like dish out as many congressional subpoenas as possible and force these people to come and speak in front of Congress and basically undress them to the best of their ability.
There's also other things that they can do, because the power of the purse is really, really important. Yeah. And Democrats don't think about how important it is or how they can use it. So they could write a law and say, no money will be distributed to the Department of Justice until they cooperate with the investigation by the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension in Minnesota into the murder of Alex Preddy, or into the situation of Renee Good, murder of Renee Good.
Yes.
So they could do that. They could say that if this is obstructed, this continues to be obstructed, we will take away $1 billion from the White House travel budget. I mean, there are things that can be done to take away the things that Donald Trump personally, or that people associated with Donald Trump like very much. You know, Kash Patel is like flying his girlfriend all over the country. Hit the FBI travel budget for the executive office. You can specifically put a line item in that says, if you don't do this, or the only way to get this money is you have to do X, Y, and Z. And so I think we have to be that granular about this. And that's the way to get the other side to comply.
Absolutely. 100% in agreement with you there. Unfortunately, I don't think that that's happening anytime soon. And I will admit that even like the left flank Democrats who we love, who we speak to with regular frequency, I feel like they are not recognizing that they're being written out right now by these same like polls, like poll-backed memos that are being distributed right now. I think it was David Shore's operation that only a couple of weeks prior, in the aftermath of Renee Good's assassination, turned around and said, we polled everybody, and AOC's messaging on abolish ICE was actually the best, only to turn around and a couple weeks after immediately release a second memo where they said, actually, AOC, Zohran Mamdani, and all of the left flank Democrats and their position on abolish ICE is the bad one, and what's actually the popular position is the reasonable, tempered approach that these moderate Democrats are claiming. Here it is. I'm showing it to my stream right now. Yeah,
it was Josh Shapiro, right? It was the
They said Shapiro, Rosen, Booker, Klobuchar good, Newsom, Zoran, Van Hollen, AOC bad. Only a couple weeks, 2 weeks after.
Surprise. There's such a thing as, there's an old story that says there are lies, damn lies, and then statistics. I mean, there are lies, damn lies, and then polling. You can get polling to work kind of any way you really want it to if you do question wording and you massage it in the right way. I don't think it would be crazy to think that the polling would match up with the people who are paying for the polling or who are, stand to benefit from the polling.
Yeah. So aside from that, there's a couple. I mean, we're gonna engage in a quick fire talking round here, if you don't mind. But I do want to get to one of my favorite ops, even though he's not necessary. He probably doesn't know I exist, or maybe he does. But Chris Murphy, I feel like Chris Murphy has ambitions of higher office. That much is clear. He has actually positioned himself at first as one of these establishment Democrats that was, totally in favor of ICE, and he very famously, like a couple months into Trump's administration, when the ICE deportations that actually increased with an alarming rate, he came out and famously said, oh, well, Joe Biden was actually deporting more people, and he wasn't doing it while making a big show of it. He was more efficient at deporting all these landscapers and construction workers and farmers, as though that's like a good thing, right? He was presenting that as a positive, and now he is one of the main messengers of this totally conciliatory approach to ICE that makes it seem like they're putting on a front or putting up a fight. Let's take a look at what he had to say, and I want to hear your commentary on this.
The Department of Homeland Security is killing American citizens.
You can hear it, right?
It's terrorizing our communities, and it's violating the law every single day, and it has to stop. And we have the power to do something about this in the Senate. As you know, Senate Democrats have said something simple. We're not going to fund the Department of Homeland Security unless there are serious and significant reforms. And so I want to talk to you for a second about A, how important this is, and B, what those reforms should look like. This is important because this is an agency that is just out of control, that is showing contempt for the law, and every single day is lying about what they're doing. The whole country is demanding that the Department of Homeland Security stop terrorizing communities, and they are aghast that the administration is lying every single day, calling, for instance, Alex Preddy, the young man that they murdered, an assassin, a domestic terrorist, when he was just exercising his First Amendment rights. The way forward is for Democrats to say simply, we're not voting to provide funding, a blank check, to an agency that's out of control.
We want reforms, is what he's about to say. Except the problem is they already wrote off a blank check. Here's 3 key things that these Democrats passed or helped pass in the Congress, right? Number 1, the Lake and Riley Act, which gave ICE, Department of Homeland Security in general, the allowance to go after people who were charged with a crime. Not actually people who are convicted of a crime, but simply charged, right? Or committed. Like the claim that you committed a crime, it's over, you're getting deported, right? That's number 1. Number 2, they passed a messaging bill thanking ICE, which I thought was insane. There was like a messaging bill, right? If I'm not mistaken, where they were like, we love our law enforcement, we love ICE. And last but not least, they of course passed the $170 billion Department of Homeland Security funding without making a big
I don't think any Democrat was on that bill.
Okay, well, regardless, they have not.
Just to be clear.
Okay, well, they have not clawed back the funding that previously was given to them. So obviously, in this circumstance, any moment that they're not making a bigger fuss about that in particular and creating the reasonable grounds to inevitably strike back on that funding and to claw back on that funding in general is basically saying you're in favor of this.
I'll say one thing slightly before I want to hear what the rest of what he says, but I'll say one thing slightly in favor of in defense of Murphy is that he was saying this well before the murder of Renee Good and well before the murder of Alex Preddy. He was actually the only Democrat who was saying, how are we funding ICE right now when they're engaging in these terror campaigns in places like Minnesota? He was like kind of the only guy doing that. And then the rest of the party came to him rather than him going back to the rest of the party. But let's keep playing it.
We want reforms. And so let me talk to you for a second about what I think these reforms should look like. First, these roving patrols, this show your papers, Department of Homeland Security, it's dangerous. And so we need to have warrants for arrests. Make sure that they're targeting individual immigrants instead of just wandering through communities with guns on their hips asking for people to show their identification. Second, no more secret police. These officers should be wearing identification. They should have body cams. There's got to be accountability for what they are doing. That's what happens with local police. That's what should happen with our federal immigration enforcement officials. Third, we need an investigation of what happened with these shootings, and it's got to be a real independent investigation, likely a state-based investigation. Fourth, no more mission creep. The Border Patrol is not trained to be in our cities. Let's make sure that the people in the Department of Homeland Security are actually doing the jobs that they were trained to do. And then lastly, let's keep DHS out of really sensitive locations like schools or churches. I think that's something that we can all agree on. But the bottom line here is that it makes no sense to provide DHS with additional funding unless we get these reforms.
I hate this messaging because if this is the boldest we're going to get, and if this is basically like communicating the desire of the national party, which I assume Chris Murphy is doing that, right? Like this is supposed to be the reasonable center-left position.
Let's just say Schumer looked at that and said, "Okay, we'll do 1 and 2, and then we'll throw away 3, 4, and 5."
And even even 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is not enough. And even 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 was not enough.
Right. But Schumer's isn't even that expansive, right? So, I mean, it's kind of crazy that everybody was kind of out freelancing, throwing a bunch of ideas at the wall. And then Schumer put all of these ideas together into this mush that is really low in terms of, very narrow in terms of what people are saying. The same day that Schumer came out with his ass, I got a thing from the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and that had like 25 ideas, including cutting funding from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, cutting that ICE,
the $170 billion.
So nobody seems to know what the other side is doing. They're putting out these different demands. And then Schumer doesn't unify the caucus, but or maybe unified the Senate Democrats, but he certainly didn't talk to the other side. And so you get this incoherence to it that I think is also a problem.
Yeah. One of the things that I fear the most is...
But tell me, what do you hate about Murphy's messaging?
Oh, perfect.
Tell me what you hate about.
This part is the part that I despise the most. DHS with additional funding unless we get these reforms. I don't think there should be any conversation about additional funding to the Department of Homeland Security when they've already gotten $170 billion in secret money funding already. Every conversation should be centered around the fact that we gave $170 billion to the Department of Homeland Security and that we should be clawing that back. There should be no conversation about like reforms for additional funds. The conversation is in my opinion, that's a non-starter. It should be the only conversation that Democrats should be talking about is ICE abolition and cutting the existing funds that we have already signed off on in an effort to basically significantly reduce the ICE workforce that currently exists. And there's enough media coverage around that. Obviously, like average Americans are aware of that. And this is a very reasonable demand.
So here's what I would say. Here's what I would say, just to build on that a little bit. Here's the problem with reforms. Murphy came out and he listed a whole bunch of reforms. And the first couple reforms would line up almost perfectly with what Tom Homan is saying that ICE is now doing in Minneapolis. So when you just put it on reforms, now the White House can say, "Oh, we're doing that. Didn't you hear Tom Homan's speech in Minneapolis today? We're doing that. So what do you want from us? We're doing the things that you said. So why don't we just move forward?" And the problem is that it's always sort of a shifting kind of, yes, we have standards, but maybe they were violated once, but we're going to do better next time. And you don't get to the heart of the matter, which is if they don't have this level of funding, they can't do this level of surge. That's the bottom line.
Yes.
And that's, I think, what you're getting at.
Yes. And my problem is, once again, Democrats actually openly, in my opinion, openly admitting that they care more about the form rather than the function, right? They're more upset that people are mad because there's like mass kidnappings taking place and it's an obvious force projection that took place in Minneapolis. I mean, that was the deliberate design of this, right? So they're more mad about like the disruption that it has caused rather than the thing that people are actually frustrated about. Sure, the disruptions have brought even more people people to come out and stand against ICE. But the inception here, the inflection point here is actually people getting kidnapped from their court proceedings. Like seeing those images over and over again is demonstrated by the fact that since the Kilmar Abrego Garcia shakeup, this has been on a downtrend far before Renee Good was assassinated, far before Alex Peretti was murdered in broad daylight, right? They want to go back to business as usual politics rather than seize on the opportunity where they have the wind behind their sails, right? And it kind of feels to me like this conversation that's taking place in the Senate at the moment is a way to push the conversation further, to just find like some kind of reasonable middle ground, right? Not necessarily a reasonable middle ground that like Republicans are actually conceding anything on, but instead a reasonable middle ground to sedate their base, 80% of which in the Democratic Party that's now currently in favor of ICE abolition.
Yeah. I mean, you and I were both on the ground in Los Angeles when the first of these surges happened. And I remember going to car washes and hearing from families who had this was before we had as this more sophisticated rapid response. There was a rapid response team, but they would hear about something and it would be like ICE would come in, grab 3 people and drive away, and no one would ever know anything was different. And I remember talking to these families and the desperation in their voice. And I remember going down and seeing the National Guard in downtown LA. And all of those things happened because there was all this money in reserve. There was, and what I said at the time, that ICE operation started around June. The One Big Beautiful Bill passed in July. But I remember saying at the time, if you want to see more of this, watch what happens when this bill passes. Because they don't just have to do it in one place. They can do it all over the country at once when they have a reserve of all this money. And so that's what's really driving this. If you think it's not that, yes, there's, Border Patrol is notoriously cruel. And if you have them involved in these operations, they're going to be bad. That's absolutely true. And they should be not just sent back to the border, but sent back to the border and disarmed and reformed in major, major ways because they're a menace. Without the money, none of this happens, is my point. Without the money, none of this happens nationwide. And, when you see it up close and you hear from people and you talk to people who are affected by this, you recognize like this is madness that this is happening on the streets of this country. And the public has spoken out and they've made their position pretty clear. And I think that people in Washington ought to honor that.
Well, David Dayen, thank you so much for coming on. Always a pleasure to have you. Do you have anything that you want to plug or promote? American Prospect, everybody go subscribe.
Sure.
Keep independent journalism alive.
Prospect.org. We have an issue coming out in a couple weeks. It seems more frivolous, but it's not. It's about the business of sports, about the financialization of sports.
Ooh.
We're excited about that issue. Prospect.org/donate. That's how you can subscribe. That's how you can get our stuff every day. Yeah, we're going to keep at this issue. I think we've done like 15 stories this week about ICE operations and whether not just the funding, but everything that's going on from the attempts to stop ICE from using hotels and that whole campaign, that whole movement, to a look at the history of violence in the Border Patrol, to a look at why America was kind of moved to act when it was, frankly, 2 white people that get shot and killed, rather than, the ongoing brutality against people of color, Hispanics and blacks, black people.
When that issue comes out, by the way, we got to hook you up with Pablo Torres.
You got it. Yeah. I know Pablo very well. So, hoping to get that in front of them. But anyway, prospect.org. That's what you go for our stuff. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, David.
Always good to be here. Thank you.
All right. Bye. All right. That was David Dayen, one of my favorite guests on the broadcast. Always informative.